What a headshot! What a head!
How's it, guys? This is Dayvy, FPL, and welcome back to the Fantasy Premier League video here on my channel. Now in this video, I'm going to take you guys through my ultimate guide to the upcoming double game week 37. So yes, the penultimate game week of this season, and luckily it's also going to be a double game week, but only for 5 teams. Now, if you guys have not watched my initial free draft, you guys can go check that video out. I released it about 2 days ago. The chip has been activated and we'll be definitely using the free hit, and I'll be posting my final team selection in a couple days time. Now, game week 37 is a little bit of a weird one. We do have a deadline coming up on Sunday afternoon, morning, evening, wherever you guys are around the world. Not the conventional kind of midweek or Saturday deadline. So please make sure in your guys' calendars or your alarms, or just simply put the notifications on for this channel, as I'll be going live 1 hour for the deadline stream. But in terms of this video, the ultimate guide, I'm going to be going over the usual talking points, captaincy. I'm going to give you guys some differentials for the last 2 game weeks and the upcoming double, and also be doing some fixture analysis of some teams to target for game week 37 and game week 38. Sprinkled in there's some talking points about KDB, the FA Cup final, as well as should you free at game week 37 or game week 38 for those of you who have not activated the chip. So loads to go over, so let's get straight into it. So sit back, relax, and let's get into this video. So the first talking point that I want to be going over is the FA Cup final, and unfortunately I didn't remind you guys about this in my initial free draft, but the FA Cup final between Liverpool and Chelsea will be taking place on Saturday evening, my time, South African time. So yes, we will be getting the FA Cup final before we actually have the game week 37 deadline. Mentioned in the introduction, the deadline is going to be on Sunday, so obviously Saturday's before Sunday, so we'll be getting a lot of information from that FA Cup final, and that'll tell us a lot about Chelsea and also Liverpool. Now, in terms of both Chelsea and Liverpool situation, Chelsea winning against Leeds last night, so I do think their top 4 is almost guaranteed, depending on what happens tonight in the North London derby. Then in terms of Liverpool, still 3 points behind City, but they do have a tough game coming up against West Ham United. The thing about Liverpool though is they do play actually after that West Ham game, so I think that West Ham game's coming up on Sunday for Man City. Liverpool only play on Tuesday or Wednesday, so if Man City do beat West Ham, I'm pretty sure the league is almost done. So yes, you might actually see some rotation in Southampton away game for Liverpool, and that's probably going to be the biggest thing about the lineup for the FA Cup. Now granted, this could go to extra time penalties, so if a player does play 120 minutes, there might be some cause for rotation, but let's just assume the game goes to 90 minutes and there's an overall winner. So in terms of Chelsea, unfortunately, I'm not going to talk about Chelsea too much just because most of us have those options. We won't probably bring them in for game week 37, game week 38 against Watford at home. We'll talk about that a little bit later on, but I generally think the Chelsea options we have will stay, and on no free hit, we probably won't include too many of them. But in terms of the Liverpool assets, Southampton away is a really plum game, and with the title still in contention, at least for now, I do think they're going to put out a strong starting 11 if that West Ham game is quite cagey. But what happened in game week 36? We have Mo Salah being benched against Aston Villa a couple of days ago. Haven't really recovered from that after the KDB spectacular last night. But in terms of Salah and Robertson getting rested, does that give them a higher chance of actually starting against Southampton away? That might be the case, but the 2 players I want to talk to you guys about today are going to be Robertson and also Diogo Jota. Why I'm mentioning these 2 is that I've mentioned already Robertson was rested against Aston Villa, so that tells me that he should be starting most games from now to the end of the season. Even though Tsimikas is a worthy kind of replacement, I think that Robertson adds an extra bit of value, and therefore I think against Southampton away he will be starting as long as he comes out of that FA Cup final injury free. But Jota for me is the interesting one here because I do have an expectation of him being benched in this FA Cup final. I think the front 3 will be Diaz, Mane and Salah, and therefore Jota could be a prime replacement if you guys want to go without Salah on your free hit. Comes in 8.3 million, relatively cheaper than the Egyptian, and Robertson's also cheaper than Trent, so these 2 might be kind of safer options to opt for on a free hit, or if you guys want to punt from now to the end of the season, maybe look at these 2 assets. But as I said, we'll get loads of information on Saturday evening in the deadline stream on Sunday. I'll update you guys on what my current thinking is, but I just want to kind of plant this seed here to give you guys some insight and just warn you about the timing of the deadline. So the next talking point I'm going to be going over is all about the fixtures, doing a little bit of a fixture analysis for game week 37 and game week 38, and I will be focusing on the double game week teams. Now the reason I want to do this is that if you guys don't have a free hit and you want to bring in some options, I want to kind of show you guys the long-term plan here, long-term being 2 game weeks time, but I just think don't be really focused on 37 and not really look at game week 38. So the first team I want to talk to you guys about is going to be Aston Villa, the side that has a very nice double in 37, Crystal Palace at home, Burnley at home. We saw with Liverpool at home, they put on a relatively good performance there. I generally think the home crowd for Aston Villa plays a massive part, and that's why it's really nice to see 2 home games in game week 37. But unfortunately, with those home games comes an away game, and it's pretty much the worst away game in the Prem at the moment. It's Man City away on the final day of the Prem. Now, my head is kind of saying that Man City are going to win comfortably here. My heart is saying that maybe Aston Villa can hold them to a draw or win by some miracle, but I genuinely think this will be a kind of easy game for Man City, and therefore I will be limiting my Aston Villa players if you guys want to bring them in on a free hit. The one thing I will say though is that if you guys want to go for an Ings or a Watkins, depending on that Watkins injury, I think there are a nice little downgrade either to one of Tony playing Leeds on the final day at home, great fixture there, or you can upgrade them if you have some money to maybe a Werner against Watford at home. But I do think the double's very nice for Aston Villa assets and therefore bring them in, but just make sure you have a replacement in game week 38 if push comes to shove. The next team though really combines kind of a great fixture in 37 and game week 38. It's going to be Leicester, and unfortunately they did that Chelsea away game, but with that Chelsea defense not looking up to scratch at the moment, I mean a Jamie Vardy or Maddison can easily get points in that game. So my recommendation for Leicester would be that I would try and bring one of these two assets in just because they are out of that European competition. They do have Southampton at home, a plum fixture there, mentioned it with the Liverpool assets. Southampton are shipping the most goals in the Prem at the moment, and therefore for a home fixture on the final day, absolutely perfect for a haul. The one thing about Leicester though is that we have a nice little source over on Twitter. Sam Martin usually gives us some updates of that Leicester lineup, and if I do get news of a certain Jamie Vardy starting, I might include him on my free hit draft just because that Watford away game looks simply outstanding. Now the only thing to kind of worry about is some rotation there with the James Maddison. He might be rotated for the Chelsea game, the Watford game, maybe even the Southampton game, but I would kind of roll the dice here if you guys want to go for a differential because I think the ceiling is quite high for these assets. In terms of the defense, wouldn't really look at too many options besides Schmeichel, just because we can't really predict out of those defenders who's going to play. Next up, we have two home games as well. In game week 37's double for Everton, Brentford and Crystal Palace at home. Great fixtures on paper there, even though I have rated these as two kind of mediocre games. They do kind of combine that with Arsenal away. Not really that great of a fixture in my opinion, unless Arsenal do win tonight. If they do beat Spurs tonight in the North London derby, they will be guaranteed a top 4 spot basically, and therefore there might be some rotation for Arsenal in game week 38. But Everton currently fighting for their lives in relegation. However, I do think they're the odds-on favourite to escape the relegation zone, but I still do think in game week 37 could put on a good show, and therefore a Richarlison, a Pickford, or maybe even a Mikolenko could be quite nice assets. The next team to talk about is going to be Burnley, and I'm going to keep this quite short. I don't really recommend many Burnley assets, although their attacking stats are actually looking quite strong. We have a Nick Pope in goal that could rack up some save points. Spurs away and Aston Villa away, in my opinion, aren't great fixtures, but I guess the Newcastle home one is relatively fine. I think the only reason I would go for that Game Week 38 game is because it is a home fixture. I can't really recommend too many of the Burnley assets, but I guess if you guys are fans of them, you could include them. I just don't think I'd go there personally. A team though that I think is being slightly overlooked from a defensive point of view is going to be Crystal Palace. Aston Villa and Everton away, 2 games that they could keep a clean sheet in. Relatively good defensive stats recently and over the entire season. So I think Patrick Vieira has done a very good job there. I just think from an attacking point of view, with that rotation, the only person I probably trust is Wilfried Zaha. Now they do have United at home, which I probably should have regarded as a green fixture. United most recently losing a 4-0 to Brighton, so that game could be quite a good game for Crystal Palace, but I just can't really recommend it, just because you never know what United side's going to pitch up, and Crystal Palace haven't been that free scoring recently. So to kind of wrap up this talking point and this analysis, I would recommend Aston Villa as long as you have replacements in game week 38. Leicester options look simply outstanding, and Everton I think could have 1 or 2 surprises. Now going on to the next talking point, which might be quite relative to you guys on the free hit, or maybe not, haven't activated the chip deciding between game week 37, game week 38. In my personal opinion, I think either game week could kind of work. I think game week 38 is quite attractive because if you guys are on certain mini leagues, I personally am not in many leagues, I only worry about my overall rank. But say you guys are in a mini league with a mate, maybe you first or second, you guys kind of defend or attack a league depending on where you are in the league rankings, and that's why game week 38's free hit looks quite attractive. Let me just give you an example of what I mean. Let's just say you second in the mini league, you know the person in first place doesn't have a free hit, you guys can kind of go for a completely different team to them if you have to catch up a few points. If you guys are first in your mini league though, you can look at the second place, make the exact same team or predict what team he's going to put out for the last week, and therefore you guys can kind of block those moves. But I think in terms of the free hit, let's look at it more from a holistic point of view. Let's not look at mini leagues and that sort of thing. What I wanted to show you guys is the top 5 teams and the fixtures they do have in the last game week of the season. So the first team is going to be Man City. We've spoken about their fixture against Aston Villa at home. Great fixture on paper there. I do think Man City will win quite comfortably. A few goals and a clean sheet is probably an expectation, and I do think they'll receive the title after this fixture. Now the nice thing about a free hit on game week 38 is that you can kind of predict who's going to start. We might have some early team news. Man City and Pep Roulette is always a concern, but on a free hit, you can kind of pick the assets that you think will play, and therefore that probably gives you a better probability of them starting. So there's a kind of advantage of using a free hit. The next team is going to be Liverpool, who have Wolves at home. Now we're going to go for the exact opposite reasoning here. I think that if Man City do wrap up the league against West Ham, we could see some rotation here from Liverpool. Maybe a Divock Origi starting. I think they might have some rotation with some youngsters in there, just because it is the last game week of the season. And obviously Liverpool do have the Champions League coming up, I think 6 days after their last Prem game. So unlike Man City, might not be the strongest lineup, and therefore Mo Salah, Trent and Robertson might not play, and if we do get news of that, you can act on that with a free hit. But I guess the opposite of that is that if they do put out a strong starting 11, you probably own Salah and Trent anyways, and maybe add a third Liverpool asset, so therefore that advantage might be negated. The next team, Chelsea, have a lovely game against Watford at home. I would recommend 1 or 2 assets from Chelsea if you guys don't own them. I own James and Alonso, perfectly happy with them. Maybe a Mason Mount added to that midfield could be quite an advantage, a Havertz, that sort of thing. But on a free hit, you guys could pick 3 nice assets there, and I think against Watford they should put on quite a good show. The next team, Arsenal, depending where Everton are in the relegation battle, if they are still in the relegation battle, should be quite a tight game for Arsenal. You might want to ditch your Arsenal assets, but if Everton are out, you might want to kind of bring them in. Is the last game of the season at the Emirates. If they qualify for top 4, that's going to be quite a celebration there. 1 or 2 of those assets could be there, maybe some rotation for Lacazette if they have already wrapped up top 4. So a little bit of speculation about the lineups there, but I don't really think Arsenal's the be-all or end-all of Game Week 38. The last team though for me is the be-all and the end-all of Game Week 38. It's going to be Spurs against Norwich away. Now this also does depend on the top 4 race. If Spurs are out of the race, they might see some rotation there. But I generally think Norwich look absolutely terrible. And therefore if you guys don't own a Son or a Kane, I might want to free hit them in. But as you guys can see, in terms of the top 5 teams, all of them have relatively good games. And therefore Game Week 38 free hit could be absolutely magic if you guys do pick the right players. But I guess you guys have to kind of unfortunately bank on whether the league title, the top 4 or the relegation battle is kind of wrapped up before Game Week 38. Because if it's not, I reckon most sides should put out a pretty strong starting 11. Now the next talking point might be a little bit of a controversial one, but I'm going to reflect on KDB. A lot of questions were asked to me. Should you guys drop Salah? Should you drop Son for KDB? Obviously scoring 4 goals against Wolves. Lots of people want to kind of bring him in, and I'll be telling you guys my thoughts on what you guys should do with Kevin De Bruyne. So if you guys do have him, just simply keep him. But if you don't, I don't think I'll be breaking my team to bring him in. West Ham away, in my opinion, is going to be a tough game for City. I can't really see them scoring too many goals. But I guess that's what I said about Wolves. I thought that Wolves put on a better show than that. But I just think with KDB, I think Son and Salah have a perfectly fine opportunity of scoring more than him in Game Week 37 and Game Week 38. And therefore, I would just keep whatever asset you guys have. Now, obviously, if Salah does get injured, or maybe he has 120 minutes against Chelsea in the FA Cup, that's a whole different story. Then I would probably suggest bringing KDB in. But unless you guys are on a free hit, I wouldn't destroy my team. Now this might look bad if KDB goes and bangs against West Ham. That obviously could happen. That's the risk you guys take. But always go back to a quote in FPL that you can't have every single option. Let me know in the comments down below whether you guys agree with me. Should you guys be bringing KDB into your sides? I think for the last game against Aston Villa, perfectly fine to do that. But I just think for this upcoming game, I can't really recommend him when he does have quite a tough fixture in my opinion. But now let's talk about an interesting talking point here. I'm going to recommend my top 3 favorite differentials heading into double game week 37 that I think might surprise you guys with their ownership. Now in terms of the ownership, I will only be reflecting on the top 10k ownership here, just because I think it gives us a little bit more of a relative ownership here. Most of the top 10k managers are active, whereas the overall ownerships are a little bit weighted to maybe inactive managers. And therefore if you guys aren't in the top 10k, you can just reflect this to whatever ranking system you are. But my top 3 differentials with double game week 37 fixtures, unfortunately, I might be going for any kind of single game week players. I don't really think the upside's that much in terms of the single game week options. So my first option with the double game week is going to be Wilfried Zaha with a very low 0.73 ownership in the top 10k. Now Wilfried Zaha does have Aston Villa and Everton away in game week 37, and I guess the only controversial one there is most of us do have a double up in Aston Villa defense and probably an Everton defender, so you're actually hoping that Wilfried Zaha does blank. But Zaha over the previous game weeks, although his stats don't actually look that strong, that's one thing I will say to you guys is don't go look at the stats because his XG, shots and that sort of thing aren't that great. But he is on penalties, and Crystal Palace with those tricky options out wide have actually been winning quite a few. So what you guys are kind of getting as an option on penalties, has a good chance of a clean sheet point, and if Crystal Palace do score, probably going to be involved, and therefore is one of my favorite differentials for game week 37. The next option is going to be a striker though. It's going to be Danny Ings from Aston Villa. Now in terms of Watkins versus Danny Ings, we have had some injury news about Watkins. Gerrard saying after the Liverpool game that he did pick up a small injury, but we will get more news on that, I'm pretty sure, tomorrow in the press conferences. But what I would say, if Watkins is going to be out, even if he's not out, I would heavily recommend Danny Ings. Now Ings comes in with 0.09% ownership in the top 10k, so on a free hit, I would recommend it, or if you guys want to go for a transfer, I'd also recommend it just because of that low ownership, and in terms of the highest ceiling, I think he's one of the best options for double game week 37. We actually will be comparing Watkins to Danny Ings shortly, so I'm going to put this off for now and let's go on to the third option. So the third option is going to be a defender. So we've got a midfielder, a forward, and a defender. It's going to be Mykolenko from Everton. Now the Ukrainian comes in with a cool ownership of 1.72%, and I personally do like him because versus Pickford, he's a little bit more attacking. Now obviously I'm comparing a goalkeeper to a fullback, but I just think that you guys have to do this on a threat because obviously a fullback has a better chance of getting attacking threats. So he does come in quite cheap, and that's why I do like him. And if you're going to include an Everton option, I think Mykolenko could be a nice little differential. He did pick up some attacking returns in game week 36, so that might edge you onto getting him. And I think the chance of a clean sheet with those 2 home games is pretty strong for the blue side of Merseyside. So these are going to be my 3 top differentials, but you guys might have different options. Drop them in the comments down below. I just think the ownership of these players is absolutely sensational, especially with the double game week on the horizon. But now let's get on to this debate I've mentioned in the prior talking point. Ings versus Watkins, which kind of striker should you go for? I just want to mention again that Watkins could actually be injured for the upcoming game week, and therefore I'd wait as long as possible for some more injury news. But if he is back and firing, I would probably recommend bringing one of these 2 assets in this week. Now Stevie G did come out and say in the press conference that he does really like playing with 2 up front. He thinks with Coutinho and Buendia in the 10 that Ings and Watkins have actually been looking quite strong, and overall that formation does kind of suit them. So if you guys want to go Maverick and go for both of them 100%, but chances are you can only afford one of them or want to get one of them, and therefore which one should you guys get? So I'll be comparing these 3 assets in terms of goal threat. I know there's a bunch of stats that you guys can look at, but I personally do prefer these stats because they are strikers. But in terms of the first overall kind of universal stat, that's going to be minutes played. Now I did select game week 30 to game week 37, and in terms of the minutes played there, we have Danny Ings with 292 versus Ollie Watkins with 613. And that's where the first kind of talking point comes about, that if you guys want to go for security, I would recommend Ollie Watkins. If Stevie G does switch up the formation, Ollie Watkins will be the sole striker, and therefore from a safety point of view, I would recommend Ollie Watkins. But now when we go on to kind of the attacking stats, I'm going to be going over non-penalty XG per 90 minutes, and you guys can actually see that Danny Ings has double the non-penalty XG per 90 minutes than Ollie Watkins does. 0.8 versus 0.4, which just shows you how attacking Danny Ings is when he does start, and therefore if he does play, I would recommend Danny Ings. That kind of continues into shots. We have Danny Ings with 4.6 compared to Ollie Watkins, 3.1 per 90 minutes played, and therefore you guys can just see that Danny Ings is looking like a better option than Ollie Watkins. Now Ings does come in 0.2 more expensive. I think it's 7.7 versus 7.5, but I do think that extra 0.2 is worth it as long as Danny Ings does start both games. So now you guys can see why I actually highlighted Danny Ings as my favorite differential, or one of my favorite differentials, because the attacking stats are there, the ownership is low, and that's the perfect recipe for a nice little differential for the double game week. But talking about differentials, let's go over onto the captaincy options. And the first captaincy options, the first 3, are going to be more differentials that I think you guys should go for if you want to be a little bit more Maverick. So the first option there, Mr. Maverick himself, it's going to be Jamie Vardy with Watford away and Chelsea away. Now if we do get news on Twitter that Jamie Vardy does start against Watford, I probably will be bringing him in on my free draft just because Watford are terrible defensively and Jamie Vardy likes to score goals. We saw yesterday how he managed to rack up 2 goals, and therefore I hope that good form can continue into game week 37. So Jamie Vardy could be a Maverick captaincy option. Against Chelsea could even get some returns there. As long as he does stay injury free and not rested, I think he's a great option to kind of look at. But the next 2 options that I want to talk about, the first one's going to be Mo Salah with Southampton away. I mentioned Southampton are kind of shipping the most goals in the Prem at the moment, and I think if Mo Salah and Liverpool do want to catch Man City on goal difference, this could be one of the games to do it in. Now yes, Salah's form hasn't been great, but this is a Southampton side that don't defend really well, and that's why I think the Egyptian could add to his golden boot tally in this fixture. Talking about the golden boot though, the next contender, Heung-min Son, the South Korean, has Burnley at home. Now this game doesn't kind of strike me as many goals scored. I think maybe 3-0 is going to be the maximum that Spurs do have, but Son's in great form and Burnley look pretty bad, and therefore the top 4's not wrapped up. I think the South Korean could be a great asset to look at. But yes, these are my personal 3 favorites, the projected top 3 scorers. These are simply differentials that you guys can look at if you want to catch up in some mini leagues. But now going on to the projected points and my favorite options to look at, and no brainer here, it's going to be double game week options, and the first one's going to be Wilfried Zaha. Now the only thing to worry about with Zaha is that his stats don't look that strong from an attacking point of view, and with 2 away games, I think Crystal Palace aren't that great away from home. Aston Villa and Everton, 2 sides that can easily keep a clean sheet here, but I do think that Zaha's a safe option because of that penalty threat. The next 2 options though are going to be more kind of forward options. The first one's going to be Ollie Watkins. Now yes, if Ollie Watkins is injured, just simply rotate Danny Ings in here, but I do think the safety of minutes makes Ollie Watkins a better captaincy option versus Danny Ings. The 2 home games for me are simply outstanding, Crystal Palace and Burnley at home. I do think that Aston Villa score in both of these 2 games, and therefore Ollie Watkins has to be a heavy favourite for the armband. Another striker to talk about is going to be Richarlison. Everton kind of drawing to Watford, which was a little bit of a surprise to me. I thought they would simply kind of score a few goals when I saw that lineup of Watford, but that does kind of complement the bad form that Everton have had away from home. But luckily, game week 37, you look there, 2 home games for them, so I think that Goodison Park's going to be absolutely rocking, and the Brentford and Crystal Palace games should be quite good ones for that attack. So I think out of these 3, the popular option will be kind of Richarlison, but I do think Ollie Watkins or Danny Ings could be a slight differential versus the popular choice. Let me know in the comments down below, you guys are captaining. Are you going for Richarlison? Are you going for a Salah, a Son? Or are you playing a little bit differential and going for a Danny Ings? But this is basically wrap up the video, guys. Hopefully you did enjoy it. Please don't forget to like if you did and subscribe if you're new and haven't subscribed yet. I'll be seeing you guys for the team selection probably coming up on Saturday. Otherwise, enjoy the North London derby tonight and hopefully song bangs. But I'm signing off. It's been Dayvy FPL and I'm out. Cheers, bye.